Welcome to the channel, everyone. Today we are going to go through the process of how to carve a lady gnome, or gnomette as I call them. You can do a couple different designs here. You see this one's got freckles, this one kind of has rosy cheeks. And we're going to start off with a 1.5 by 1.5 by about 4 inches long. It's just shy of 4, I think. This is basswood, so whatever your preferred carving wood is, you can go with that. And we're going to go through the process of how I make these. This can be carved with just a regular pocket knife. If you so desire, I have done that. For this video, I will be using dedicated carving knives though. Just a little easier, I think. But it can be done with just a regular pocket knife if that's what you got. So to start, we're going to find our center lines on all 4 faces of your block. So little trick for this is to line up your pencil halfway and keep your finger as like a guide, and you can just slide it on down. So mark out our lines, and then these are actually carved like this. I usually start a carving on the edge because it makes it easier to get that depth. I think not everyone does that, but it's something I do for a lot of my carvings. And we are going to divide that half also in half. And we'll do that on the opposite side as well. So we have kind of our front and our back of the gnomette. So I'm going to do that. And we're going to take off this corner right here. So we're going to carve that off. You know, this kind of triangle, we're going to take that off, and we'll do the same thing over here. So make sure your knives are super sharp, and make sure you have a glove. Gloves are important, and super sharp knives also important. If your knife isn't sharp enough, this will be a very frustrating experience for you, and nobody wants that. I certainly don't want it for you. That's not fun at all. So I'm going to take my roughing knife here to get these corners cut down, and we'll stop at those 2 lines. Yep, this will, when I go one direction, the grain will probably break going the other direction. That's okay. We can clean that up later, but just the way you're holding it, you can't always get that full sweep from start to finish. So this will probably break too at the end. Yep, that's okay. That happens. We won't use the roughing knife much. If you just have a single blade, that's okay. This is my flex cut. I think it's like a 2-inch roughing blade or something. We won't use it a whole lot, but we do use it some. Okay. Now we've got that cleared, we have our starting spot that we can start drawing on our template. So this is about what it's going to look like, and you can see the nose is just about in the middle. You can move the nose up or down. If you want her to look a little shorter, move the nose down, because then her hat will be taller, and just like her torso and her head overall will be smaller, and so she'll look shorter. Even if you have another one like right next to her, if you have a taller hat, she's going to look shorter. If you want her to look taller, you know less hat space and more head and body space. So our nose is about in the middle, and I take up this hole in between these 2 lines to draw the nose. This, she'll probably end up looking a little taller. This nose looks like it's lining up to be a little higher than most of them, but that's okay. Yeah, that's actually considerably taller, but that's all right. We'll have a little taller. And then after you get your nose drawn, like I said, I take this whole space, because you can always carve it down. You can't add wood after you cut it off very easily. They do make wood glue, but we're not really dealing with that. We're gonna do what we can. So then we give a little bit of space You can see this one has a little bit more space between the top of her nose. She's got a little more space between the top of her nose and the brim of her hat. This one has a little bit less space there, so 1/4 inch-ish to give her hat. That will be the bottom of her hat. And then do about that same distance up here for the brim of her hat, the top of the brim of her hat. And we're going to follow that around. So it does dip down, her hat does dip down, as you can see there. So we'll do that, and we can make that come down actually as much as we want it to, really. Try to make a meet in the middle here. This one will end up looking a little taller because of the nose placement, but that's okay. Probably the tallest one I've done so far. And we're just drawing on these lines. So that's what we got so far. Now we need to draw in some other details, okay? So I don't normally carve in a mouth. I'm just a little hesitant to do that, and usually if you have the flower, it kind of covers up part of where the mouth would be anyway. So I'm going to draw in my flower. There's to do around 5 petals. We'll also take up this whole gap in between the two as best we can. And we can carve it down later. Because she's got to be holding said flower, so we'll usually draw lines about halfway in between these. Just kind of do a little like half circle thing to give her her hands. And we'll need a stem off that flower. We can change the stem later too if we want. Give her her arms. There's her arms. Okay, her eyes will be in here somewhere, so we'll do... I call these like arches or church window eyes. You just draw a straight line and then just kind of a little arch over like that. Now her arms and her hair. So her arms go out to the sides and her hair covers part of her arm. So that's one section right there, and this will come down. We'll have to carve that out. It'll end up being part of her head, but that's okay. And this will be her braid. Now her braid took a little bit of time for me to learn how to do. I'm going to first draw in her hair tie down here. Make it a little bigger than what you actually want, because you can always carve down. And we'll have her little strands of hair coming off here. And I'm just going to draw a big old section off for that. I've noticed the best way that I think is to make 3 bunches of the braid. So like 3 or 4. This one has a lot more. I just think that took too long. So somewhere between 3 and 4 as the most on one side is what seemed to work best, I think. But, you know, this is your carving. You can do what you want. I have 1 there, 1 there. Probably could have done 4, but look at that. Gotta carve in those braids. Try to make them alternate a little bit if you can, you know. But that's okay. We'll do a little more there when it's time to get to the braids. So there's that, and then we will likely, her arm will wrap around, but we'll get to that. And then we usually have her dress, so it kind of flows down a little bit. Her hair covers part of it, so we don't have as much to do there. Her arms look a little high. little bit high, so I might have this arm come down here. We'll be close. We'll be close. We do have a couple other lines that we'll get in here. Like one is her hair will wrap around the back. So this is hat brim, this is hair. This is kind of like her upper torso, so right underneath her arm, just move that along. And then that will also come down to be her dress. So something like that. So now we are going to start carving. First thing I usually do is separate her nose and the brim, the lower brim of her hat. So get your stop cuts in to get those separated. Okay, and now we will do the upper brim of her hat. Same thing, just opposite side. Get your stop cuts in. Okay, so now we got our stop cuts in around the hat. We need to make stop cuts around her nose. That way we have the most wood to work with for that. This is definitely a carving. You have to think about the layers of each item. So we need the nose to stick out, which means we have to have that carved first, and then we can go down to carve the rest of her face and her head. The same thing with her flower and her arm. So her flower needs to be on top of her hands, that needs to be on top of her arms, that needs to be on top of her apron, that needs to be on top of her dress. So you got to think about the different layers and what you're carving in relation to the rest of the carving. So not too difficult, just a little technical if you're not used to thinking about those types of things. Okay, so we got our starting cuts for her hat and for around her nose. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add the stop cut for the little flop of her hat, little floppy hat, and then we're going to carve out the rest of it. So probably about halfway. Like I said, this one, she'll look a little taller, so she has a little less hat to work with than most of the other ones I've made. But probably about halfway is where I'll put the stop cut for this hat, so that it still has a little bit of room to be floppy. I am going to just round off that side real quick. Same for that. And about halfway is where we'll add that. You don't need to go all the way. You know, you don't need to take it all the way here to this middle line. You don't need to do that. Just give it some distance so that we got something to work with. We'll be cleaning up these stop cuts as we go on. And we're going to carve down her hat now. And carve away. Get this narrowed a little bit. And we will have to cut across the end grain at the top in just a second. Try not to do that too much, but it is something we got to do to round over the top. And so we'll be cleaning up these down here. And especially this side, you need to cut almost across like that, because that's the way to make that lean, you know, it's leaning over that way. So we gotta make it lean over. Okay, this is another spot where we need to carve down. This is the back of her hat. So that will also make it easier to make that. When we have to carve the end grain to round it off, this will make it easier. You could use your roughing knife for this if you want, if you have one. It's an appropriate use for that. This is the floppy part of her hat, so we got to round that off as well. We'll keep going here. See, now we're starting to round off the top. That's exactly what we want. Now I'm just attacking the edges of this end grain up here to get that rounded look. So where, like, see this edge where it's end grain, mat meets where I cut before, I'm just gonna kind of attack that to round it over. That's how you make anything that has hard edges look a little more round, is you just keep attacking those corners. Eventually it will either look round or be round, which we don't need perfectly round with whittling, but the appearance of round is often what we're going for. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad. I'm going to take off a little bit more of this side over here. Apologize if you can hear the fan going. My air conditioner keeps kicking on and off. It's kind of hot outside today, so it's trying to keep up. I'll try to get that out in editing, but no promises, so if it's there, I apologize. And I'm getting these spaces out because that is wood from the edge of the block, and if you don't shave that off, like this is our center line, so I know my knife has never touched that, it won't paint as well. So definitely at least want to get your knife over every edge at least a little bit if you plan to paint. The same thing here. Like, that's my center line, so I know none of that stuff's been cut, and we can actually go down to our stop cut there. We can do a little more cleanup around here. There we go. That's not too bad at all. You can make this come up, the floppiness of her hat come up just a little bit, I think, by angling a stop cut up. And then you just round off the hard edge from that cut. You kind of cut in underneath. Give it that look. There we go. The top of her hat is done. We'll clean up around the brim of her hat and whatnot. But the roughing part, the large part of her hat is done. Okay. Probably use a little bit more of a stop cut here. Going up to the bottom. Okay. Now we're going to be working on her hair, as well as trying to get just the overall profile out. So I'm going to put a stop cut here underneath her arm to start getting that overall profile for her. I feel like that arm's just a little bit too high. Let's see how it goes. I think I put the arm just a little bit too high. And we can't do as much on this side because of her braid. And you can do braids on both sides if you want. I usually just do the single braid. I think that looks nicer for these carvings, but it's entirely up to you. This is where we get a little trickier. We have to put a stop cut inside. So where her hair is here and her arm, we're gonna start carving that out. So some of these it's a combination kind of like stop cuts as well as 3-corner cuts. And we put our knife in to get that out. We got that out. We gotta do the same thing on both sides. This side has her braid, so a little bit different. But you get that 3-corner cut where her elbow is. Get that out of there. And you follow it up to her hat brim. Get that out as well. We will round all those cuts off. Right now we're just getting the regular old profile out. So we first do our, some roughing out, and then we'll add our details later. So always leave more than you think you may need in your rough outs, because you can always take off more, as we said earlier. Hard to put it back on. They make wood glue, but it's hard to put on. Okay. We also need to box out where this flower is going to be, because as we talked about earlier, with the layers and what gets carved first and on top of other things, much like the nose, we need to set a box aside for this flower. Otherwise, your flower is going to be in the same plane as some other things, and it's just not going to work out as nicely as we want it to. So, and we can start to carve out some of these things. I actually put a little stop cut here and cut up to it. We can always draw that stem back on. That's not a big deal. That's easy fix. that down. Draw the flower stem back on. And I'm going to keep going with these here. Forgot to grab my brush. I usually have a brush. Get out some of those chips that don't want to come out all the time. Get stuck. Okay, we got her face done, or I should say face roughed out, not done. And we are going to now continue to rough out where her arms are versus where her face is versus where her hands are. You know, we're really doing more relief carving here with the 3-corner cuts and with the stop cuts that we're doing. This is quite a bit of relief carving. Trying to create those separate planes. And you just go in straight down, and then you go in at an angle to separate them to get that material out of there. And this is connected. How are you still in there? There we go. Okay. So much like we said with the hat, if we can see these lines, that means our knife hasn't touched it. Now, I don't usually paint the face, like the whole face. Like this, you can see is, you know, that's bare wood. That's bare wood. Her eyes were painted on. The freckles were painted on. But I do put a finishing oil on it, and this oil will be better, same as the paint, if it will take better if the knife has gone over it and at least removed that first layer of wood. It does seem to work better, I have noticed. So we'll make sure that we do that. Make sure her face has that nice rounded look. And we do that by going from the middle towards the edges. So from here, I go down. On the side, you go from the middle and go down. And same thing from the top. You're in the middle and you're going down towards the edge. And that kind of creates that rounded look for her face. We just keep doing that. Another way we can do that is to separate more of the wood around her nose. The more wood we have to work with for her nose, and the more separation we get there, the better and easier it will be to shape her nose. So we do want to make sure we're doing that as well. Some pencil lines there we gotta erase with our knife. And we got a nice separation for her nose. And we'll just kind of round off those edges, attack those corners for her nose. Just gonna attack the hard edges best you can, and then round them off. Try to clean up those little knife marks also as best you can. That part didn't fully separate. There we go. I'm going to make sure you clean up any tear outs or anything that may have happened. All right. So we have the majority of her hat, and now her nose, and pretty much her face is done. We might do a little bit of cleanup, especially her face might get a little bit of impacted as we carve out her hair and her arms, but for the most part, her face is now done. I got one little pencil mark there that needs to go. Okay, so now we're going to work on this arm. So we're going to do that first by separating her hair from her arm. You can see we do that with kind of like a V cut. We'll also give her her elbow. Separate her hair from her arm, and her hair will actually go all the way around, so we'll do that now too. Her hair goes all the way around. So we will separate that, which is also kind of a V cut. Yeah. Let's see, given some distinction between. So this is her braid, in the spot of her braid. At first, I just kind of draw a line down, not draw a line, cut a line down, because this is also a layer that her braid needs to be on top of everything else. So score it, mark it off, and then you can continue on your merry way. With carving, what else do you need to carve? When we get to her braid, we'll clean that up a little bit. And we don't really want that hard edge there either, so we'll clean that up. Okay. Now we need to clean up when her hair meets her face. So we'll in there, 3-corner cut, 3-corner cut. Just clean it up. Just kind of like that. We're not going to leave the side of her arm to be that sharp, so we can round that off. Okay, now we can add our elbow. So we go down just a little bit, kind of hook it down. Like I said, you could do 2 braids if you want. I don't usually do that with this type of Gnome, but you could. If you really wanted to, you could try a style. Maybe I should try one that has got 2 braids. I think the single braid on this design looks nice. I do have a different Gnome that I've done double braids on, but this one, it's usually the single braid. So that's her hair and her arm. We got a little bit of cleanup to do, but we can do we'll do a final. At the end, we kind of go around and clean up all that stuff anyway. Now we do need to separate her arm. So we're going to separate this. Again, this is more of a rough out than a full carve on her arm. Because her hand, so it's the flower, and then her hand, and then her arm. So we're just trying to get her arm separated for the most part. We're not doing the detail. What's her hand, what's not her hand stuff. And it does get a little confusing here because we have these extra lines. So that's her hand. That middle line will probably be ignored, and we'll get rid of it. in a second. And we need to do it on both sides as well. And we'll actually end up doing this around the flower stem too, so we can kind of protect that flower stem a little bit. We'll end up carving around it. Because we are going to carve down to these lines. Trying to get that out of there. We can always carve the stem down more, not a big deal. I can get that guy out of there. The same thing here, we need to separate her arm. And just like we did on the other side with her braid, we need to score the area for her braid so that we make sure we've got depth there. And we do a 3-corner cut. And I am right-handed, and that's why I have the braid on this side, because it's easier for me to carve this away on her right side. So looking at it, the left side, it's easier for me to do that with my right hand versus my left hand. Now, obviously, you have the opposite of that over here, but I think that's a little less critical because that's not the front. That's not what people are looking at when you first see it. But you do you. If you put a braid on both sides, you get to practice both sides. So that is a good thing to do as well, is to practice both sides. I'm better at it now than I was when I first started making these, I'll tell you that much. We just kind of keep carving away. We're not going to carve it down flat to the line that was here. This one's gone now, but we're not going to carve it down flat. We're just trying to get down close to that. We got lots of room to work with her stem for her flower now, which is good. All right, now we got a rough out of her arms. And we are also going to score this arm for her braid, because the braid is covering her elbow. So we do have to separate that a little bit. Her braid is on top of her arm. So we do need to separate that. Carve up a little bit. Especially from the bottom, I try to sweep up. Gives it more the impression of her dress. Okay, so now we're going to separate the bottom of her arm, and we also have to separate kind of where her torso is of her dress from the rest. So that's what that second line's for. If you're painting, this section would be the same color as her dress. And this is also a very similar thing that we did with when separating her hair around the back. It's really a V-cut. I mean, it's kind of a mix between a V-cut and a stop cut. Depends on how technical you want to get, I suppose. But looks like a stop cut, and then you just kind of go back to it. We'll end up rounding it off anyway. Make sure we got a solid 3-corner cut there and there. Plus her braid's gonna give us some depth over there as well. Let me make sure we have those. Okay. And then her arm, we need to separate her arm from the rest. So we do that by kind of going on an angle up here. And then just removing that material away. And now she's got an elbow. Yeah. And just kind of do that. Now she has an arm. A distinct arm. You can kind of make this go down a little bit. That'll be okay. So now we've got that carved out. We'll end up rounding this all off. You know, as we talked about earlier, this is, you know, that's that wood that was on the block, the face of the block that makes it hard to paint or oil. So we got to make sure that we take care of all of that. And we can do that. We just shave it away. Okay, since we're here, what I am going to do is I am going to carve this chunk off between these two lines. Okay, since we're here, I am going to carve this part off between these two lines. So kind of think of it as connected right there. You can kind of see an example. And I'm going to use the roughing knife for that, just to get some more texture and depth in our carving. We don't want it necessarily flat. We just want the bottom part to be different. So there's that. Between those two lines. Doesn't need to be flat. Just get some texture. Separate our braid here a little bit more as well. Okay. Now we're moving on to the braid. So we will redraw some of our lines here. That's one. That's a braid right there. Okay. This is the part, if you have a detail blade or a detail knife, could be helpful because you're going to get into some tighter spots. So if you've got a little detail knife, it helps. If you don't, that's okay. You can still do it. Just might be a little more challenging. So the first thing we do is separate our hair tie. Our hair tie signifies the end of the braid. So we make a stop cut at our hair tie. And now I usually just carve the first one. So the first one gonna look something like that. I guess you can round that off. Helps a little bit. First braid. Draw out some of my lines again. And we score our braid lines. Once you've scored your braid lines, now you just separate, kind of do V-cuts at each one. And you gotta do it on both sides. Looks like we'd actually fit, might be able to fit another little section in here actually, which I might do. You'd think I'd be better at drawing braids. You wouldn't think that would be that difficult, but here we are. Then we just separate each little section. This is why having a little detail knife helps. But if you don't have one, that's okay. You can do it with just a regular pocket knife. I have done it. It's a little more challenging, but you can. As long as it's sharp, you'll be alright. Alright, and it does taper down near the bottom. So, which is why when we left all that extra room, that helps us because we can taper it under a little bit more control than we would have otherwise. Okay, so we have the rough out of our braid, and each little corner, we are going to try to get those little corners out to give that texture of like the bumpiness of the braid. So each little corner for the braid, we need to get that out of there. Then you can see how that helps. See that? It'll be more prominent with this one, I bet. Yep. There's a section. It's just a 3-corner cut for the most part. And then one right here. It does feel like we should have one right here, doesn't it? That's all right. So now we also need to do a stop cut on the other side of the hair tie. And we prefer to have this kind of like rounded off a little bit at the bottom, like for her strands of hair. And you can do as much here as you want. So like this one, I separated some strands of hair, and this one I just left it. You know, it's kind of up to you. Either way, I think it looks okay, so it's very much how much detail you want to go into. You can do as much as you want at the bottom. For this one, I think I'm just going to leave it. And we want to clean up all of these edges. So you can see the edges where like there's separation of wood, like you can see the different separation of wood. We want to clean that up so it looks smooth and continuous like that. So we need to clean that up. And you do that just by going on an angle, not taking away too much from what you carved. Just going on an angle, clean it up a little bit. Be careful not to do too much, but that's how you clean those up. We got to do the same thing for the front. And you'll notice that's the difference between carvings that look really, really good. Even simple carvings, like this is a fairly simple carving overall. But that's a big difference between carvings that look really, really good and really, really nice, and ones that don't look so nice, is where the edges cleaned up, where the little strands taken care of. You know, if you watch some of the bigger channels on YouTube, some of the really cool guys like Johnny Layton and Linker, you know, their carvings always look so clean because they take care of those edges. As well as, you know, they're just very skilled and whatnot, not taking away anything from them. But it is something you'll notice that their edges look very clean. So it helps. Dalo as well. Very clean edges. I love all those guys. They make cool stuff. But, okay, now we got those cleaned up. You can see we got her braid. Now we just need to carve her arms, her flower, and we'll carve in a little apron. The apron's not a big deal. It's not terribly difficult to do, but we will make sure she has that. The flower is another part where having a detail knife helps because it's so small. But again, you can do it with a pocket knife. I have done it with a pocket knife. As long as it's sharp. As long as it's sharp, you got a good edge, you'll be just fine. So we're pushing down, straight in, and then carving away to give us space to work with for this flower. And now here's the tricky part. I redraw our flower on here as best I can. I'm not much of a drawing artist. The bigger you make the middle of the flower, the harder the petals will be. But the smaller you make the middle of the flower, the more difficult it will be. So what I usually do is I draw the size of the middle that I want. We gotta go straight in for that. Then I don't carve around it, but I carve out the lines of the petals. So we're kind of start in the middle from where we met the center of the flower. I forget what it's called at the moment. And then we gotta carve out. It's kind of curving because the petals are curving. And we'll do that. What you'll be able to do then is you can almost slide your knife underneath and get the rough part. We're making the rough out of the petals, so you can make the rough out of the petals that way because they're small. They're kind of hard to do. But if you gave it a starting point, which is that center circle that we carved, and then you carve out, and then you slide the knife underneath, it will usually pop out that little corner. Now it might take a little bit of practice. You might have to do it, you know, you might have to run the edges of the petals a couple times. But that's the best method I've been able to find to get these done. Plus, you're also running into her hands here. So you don't have to go all the way down. You just need to get down to that layer of where it looks like she's holding the flower. So we'll see that in just a minute here. And this is why having a detail knife helps a lot. Okay, and we'll get to the point where it looks like she's holding it. Because her hand is going to be right here, but her hand isn't up here. So we can carve that whole point away. Her hand is not up here. That's just going, you know, she's kind of holding the flower up in front of her face. So we can carve that part away. And you can see that those petals look more defined now. Her hand is partially by this one, but not all the way. So we can take care of that. Now you can see we're making progress there. These other ones, her hands are behind it, holding it. So you don't have to do that. Now, the other tricky part is creating a good separation between the petals and the middle. So we got to do this. Kind of go in on an angle towards that middle of the flower. So be very careful. You don't have a ton of wood that you're working with here. And we can also carve away a little bit of the top of the petal. To help make that extinction. Okay. I also usually do some V-cuts around the edges of each petal to separate them from each other. And we do need to try to round the edge of the middle of the petal, just like we kind of did her nose. Same idea. I'd also try to round the tops of the petals as well. All right, our flower looks good. We are almost done. So now what we need to do, separate her hands. So her hands are right here. And they're kind of just like little half circles. Nothing too crazy. So we're gonna carve away her arm just a little bit to separate her hands from her arms. So we usually do a stop cut down that line. And we do a V cut. You don't want anything too crazy because you don't want to go all the way down to the same plane that her face is on. But it will be close. And I also do a 3-corner cut at the edges of where her hands meet her arms to give more distinction that, hey, there's a separation here. And then you just kind of round them off. We'll get this flower stem taken care of in a minute. This flower stem is thicker than it needs to be, which is the way we want it. Then we can take more off. That. We'll cut there. We'll cut there. See, now you can easily see where her arms are versus where her hands are. And we want to, like everything else, we want to round off those hard edges. Okay, this flower stem is a little bigger than what we want. So that's pretty easy. We're going to taper it down by carving from here down. Taper it down. Be careful not to go too much too fast. And then we just slice the edges off until it's a thickness that you're happy with. So not too terribly difficult. Do want a little more separation from the stem from the petal. Get her hands. I might need to carve in like that, down like that, in, and then down. There you go. I think that stem looks okay. Maybe still a little, maybe a little big of a stem still, but overall I think we're doing all right. There we go. That's better. Now the very last thing we need to do before just some cleanup is give her her apron. This is an optional piece, I guess. I like to do it because it gives just a little more variety, another thing that you can paint. But about halfway from her arms, we're going to do her apron. So we just kind of go down a little bit. Oh, so you're 1/4 inch away from the bottom, I guess. Draw a little box. It's pretty easy. You score your boundaries here. Stop cut up to the bottom of her apron. Cut it up the side. Just like everything else. Make sure you clean up that edge. It's another 3/4 cut here. Some of these cuts can be a little tricky with holding the piece, so be careful about that. I have had a knife slip on me a time or two doing similar things. So just, be cautious. Thankfully I was wearing a glove and it could have been a lot worse than it was. And it got me. So be careful. A bit of a tear out. I'm gonna try to fix it. Okay, and we'll round that edge right there for her apron. Round this edge right here, just go over it. A nice gentle angle. Clean up whatever you got to. you get the pencil marks off. Easier done with a knife than with an eraser in my experience, but on wood anyway. Okay, so our very last thing we need to do is just cleaning up some hard edges. So for example, around the back here, we need to make sure we get all those pencil marks off and round over this edge. So we're going to do that with everything we see on the back. And also flatten this a little bit more, I think. Now we also need to clean up her hat. Now that everything else is done, the last thing I do is cleaning up her hat. So we gotta round off these pointy edges. And then we are going to take our knife and go over that hard edge. That's what we want to do. Just take care of that hard edge of her hat. You need to deepen the stop cut or something, that's okay. When you're doing it, it's alright. And then the same thing for the bottom of her hat. We need to take care of that same edge. See that hooked just a little bit in more than I wanted it to, so now I gotta deepen. I gotta redo the bottom of the stop cut for her hat. That's okay. It'll still look good in the end. Trying to get that edge off, get those pencil marks off best we can. Maybe separate her hat brim from her braid a little bit more now. And that's why we do this at the end. It helps clean up some things that, you know, fixing a hat brim is really not that big a deal, but if you were to have to redo a braid over and over again, that might be a little annoying. So you just go around cleaning up stuff. I mean, you get to the point where, you know, you cleaning up actually risks be more damage to a carving than it does fixing it. Definitely been there and done that, and have made carvings worse by trying to make them better. But overall, that is how we carve a gnomette, this version of the gnomette. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit like and subscribe if you did. Comment below if that was helpful for you. You can keep going on them. I usually would burn each edge. That's why that dark line got there. I think it helps a lot. It helps bring out the paint. But I usually would burn the edges and then, you know, paint different designs. Gnomettes have lots of different colors you can use, lots of options for what you can put, color combinations. And like I said, you do freckles, you can do, you know, some rosy cheeks, different colored flowers and whatnot. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you on the next one.